Alright, good evening everybody. My name is ErikWhiting and this is my project proposal for Software Engineering 2 with Dr. Dada at UHCL. The project I am proposing I'm calling Data Drop, and I will talk about it in this presentation. So as an overview, Data Drop is an application for developers. So this is probably not something it's not something I'm intending for just a regular kind of just a recreational computer user to be using. Maybe an analyst or someone that's a little bit more of a technical user that would use it for work or something professional. What it's going to do is it's going to allow users to take in data in one format, or actually in multiple formats, and then render it or save it into one specific data format that they want. So for example, taking in JSON and then exporting it to XML or to an Excel file or something along those lines. And what it's going to have is a user interface which will allow the user to take that in, and then of course the runtime will have to exist as a web service on a server or something. Basically the use case I'm envisioning for this is, say you need a bunch of XML files or Excel files or something like that for whatever reason, and your organization is taking in data from multiple sources like web services or XML or some kind of or even Excel files or something like that, and you want to consume that data, but to make life easier on yourself and your fellow developers, you would like to have that data in one format, be it JSON files, XML files, whatever, just in a format that you're expecting. And so basically this is going to streamline that process to save yourself some time. Now, as a not caveat, but I think this may be similar to what SSIS is used for, SQL Server Integration Services, but I've actually never used that application, so hopefully this doesn't end up being a cheap knockoff of SSIS. But if it is, I apologize, and but this is still going to be educational, at least for me, so that I can think about how something like that is implemented on a deeper level. So like I said, the basic idea is the data will come into many formats, and you'll want to put that into one single kind of format that you're expecting and that your application or your developers are expecting. The idea is that this would kind of just run in the background after you've done some configurations, and by configurations I mean you'll say, hey, I'm expecting an Excel file with 10 columns and however many rows. I only want these 4 columns and whatever data is in those rows, and for every row I want one JSON file that has those four columns as attributes, because my application is going to use it as I don't know, objects or database inserts or whatever. So, and then also I think it would be really cool if this could also be a DLL. So you would, in code, you would import this as a library, and you would code in the configurations, like I said earlier. I want the 4 columns from these 10 columns, and I just want that into some kind of object that I'm going to do whatever kind of work to. Yeah. So this is kind of the basic overview that I'm envisioning. So the developer or analyst maybe will be on a user interface and kind of define the source data, and then from that source data is going to map the attribute names. So this is where I was saying, like, you have an XML or an Excel file with 10 columns, but you want 4 specific columns. That's what I mean by defining mapping the attribute names. Likewise, or similarly, maybe you have a web service, and that usually gets returned as JSON, and you want 4 or 5 of the attributes returned in the JSON to be exported into an Excel file, or maybe a more condensed web service, maybe even database inserts, and you would do that here. And then you'd define the destination data. This is where you'd kind of define what kind of format you wanted exported into. Also, you could, what I'm picturing for this project is having some kind of auto insert into a database if everything is correct, or configured correctly. So after the user has defined that and done his or her configurations, then the system is taking in those configuration objects, running as a service, and anytime that service gets hit with the data type it's expecting, it sends that data to whatever destination has been configured by the developer. This is kind of a really basic mock-up of a user interface. I'm thinking the user interface will either be on a desktop app made with Windows Presentation Foundation, or a web interface with MVC. But basically, on the left here, you'd have a menu that's saying, in this example, you're taking in a web service, and the web service URL is there, and you want to send it to a database. So you'll have in, let me use my mouse, in here you'll have the configurations for the database. So this is where you would say, I want this to go to a database. The database is SQL Server. Other options here would be like Postgres or Oracle or something like that. Hopefully not Oracle. God bless you. Database, this is where you'd say the database name. Here's where you'd say the table, and this would be like object.users. So object would refer to whatever data type is coming in here. So in this case, I'm picturing a JSON object coming in that's called users, and so I'm getting that, or whatever the object's coming in as, and I'm calling that's my table, and I'm saying object.users. That's the table it's going to, and then columns, it's going to be objects.each, or some kind of nomenclature here. So say 10 different things come in the JSON object, or the JSON file, and each attribute I already know that that's going to get mapped to a database table, and I'll show an example of what I'm talking about here in a second. So here are some of the tools I'm going to use. The Windows Visual Studio helps you make a project into a DLL, dynamically loaded library. I don't know what that tool is called, so I just say DLL. C# and Web API. I figured that this will run as a web service, so Web API is kind of a no-brainer. C# obviously is the language for Web API, the other option being VB, I think, but I think C# is probably a better call. And then the front end, it'll either be .NET MVC or WPF. I'm kind of leaning towards WPF because this just kind of has more of a desktop feel, in my opinion. So here's some of the features. So the first feature is going to be the UI. This is where the user will configure the data pipeline, right? So this is where the user will say, I'm expecting an Excel file and I want it to go into a JSON file, and this is where I'm expecting it to come from. This is where I want it to go, and all that kind of stuff. The second feature being a source to file. So the source is going to come in as, any of these, Excel, JSON, XML, whatever, and then it will go to whatever kind of format you want. So in this case, it would be saving a file, right? So it'd be saving XML or Excel or .json into whatever ways you've configured it. So if you're getting an XML file that's got a bunch of different tags in it, and you want 4 or 5 of them, and you want it in JSON, this is where you would say, you've already said I'm expecting XML from this source, and now the second feature is what's turning that XML into that JSON file that you want. So it would be a .json file. The third feature would be into SQL files, or .sql files that have the inserts that you are expecting, and it'll just generate like a file that has insert into table values, yada yada yada, whatever, based on whatever's coming in. And then also the database inserts, I think it would be useful if you could make this just automatically insert data. It also might be a bad idea to do that because if you're using this to take in data from a source that you don't control, you never know exactly what you're inserting into your database. So you might want to maybe just generate the .sql files and then have somebody look at them before they insert them. Or you know exactly where the data is coming from because you control it and you've already got some kind of validations upstream of this process, and you just know you want it to go straight into the database. You don't want to bother with opening the .sql files and hitting F5 on your own. Another cool thing I think would be a data source to API. So, excuse me. So what I'm expecting here is that you could take in an XML or Excel, and you've defined the parameters and the attributes that you want to build out of your data source, and then configure it into, I would assume JSON, and then send that as like a post to a web service or a GET, I guess, and having that maybe happen automatically as well, just like the database inserts would. This might be one thing that would keep this project from being something that you could market, is you would want this to somehow be secure, because you definitely don't want to be hitting APIs with data that you're not sure what's in there, what's in the data that's hitting the API, unless you're 100% positive that your endpoint is gonna validate that data really well. But for the purposes of this project, I think just making this feature is good enough. And then finally, the importable DLL for creating objects of various sources. So what I mean by this is a DLL where you could build objects in the same kind of workflow that you would do it in the UI. So in a DLL, you would have some kind of library call that would say take in data source, and somewhere else that data source is configured. It's saying get this, this, and this, and then it's returning it to an object, and that object is going to have to be it's going to have attributes that are maybe you build them based on what you're expecting, or you have more nebulous kind of data types so that it can take in whatever. And I think that's where some of the functional programming is going to come in, the use of generics and stuff like that. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can email me at erik.whiting88@gmail.com. This is not the end of the presentation. I want to show you just a quick example of what I am picturing. So here we have a JSON file, right? I'm picturing that this is coming in from a web service, or you have a bunch of .json files saved somewhere, and somehow you've gotten this, and you want this to be a database insert. And so what's going to happen is you're going to get this. This is the data you're going to get. It's going to go through the pipeline you've configured, and let's say you wanted inserts. So it's going to export this data into this data. So insert into dbo.users, users coming from here, and then these values that are going into name, job, and age are coming from name, job, and age of the JSON object. So that is what I am picturing for what I'm calling data drop. Thank you for watching, and like I said, if you have any questions, I'll pull that question slide back up. This is my email address. Yeah, send me an email and I will try to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.